love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend of me.
Hi guys, I was watching Avatar Way of the Water, and it was a good experience seeing it. And one of the key things that I wanted to chat with you guys about was, what my impression was of the movie. And also I have here with me Tude. Tude, you don't know, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, yeah. So, I wanted to really just chat about the movie, my impressions of it, and that. And I don't watch a lot of movies at the cinema. That's something that I think I've watched like 4 movies. I watched Batman, definitely that was decent. I watched Morbius, which I did not like, and watched Black Panther, which was okay. I did a video on that. Wasn't my favorite video. Wasn't my favorite movie, but I did watch it. And, just wanted to cover it. All right. So one of the big things with this movie, and let's go through the key items that, want to discuss with this, right? So let me get this going. So let's go with our key takeaways now with this. So let's see. Add to screen. Yeah. So key takeaway that we got from this one was that there's a big gap between the first film and the sequel, 2009 to 2022. So I was a little confused watching it because I felt like I needed to watch the first film before I went watch the second one. And I was a little lost, especially with the cast and the characters. There's a whole bunch of casts in this film. And one of the key things is it's just keeping up with who is who and all of that stuff and all these characters. And, these were the main characters in the film, basically. How was it like that big gap between the films for you?
I think when a movie has such a big gap between parts, it's kind of hard to remember and follow through with the continuation. There needs to be some sort of like recap where, what happened in the past. And in the opening of the film, they did kind of briefly talk about it a little bit. And then they also discussed what life was like after that big battle for the first part. So we did kind of get a little bit, but I think for such a big gap, the first part needs to kind of play in a little bit more because there are certain key things that I could not remember from the first film. And I did not rewatch it before watching this part 2.
Yeah. And the thing about it is that it's so difficult to watch Avatar, the original movie, because I don't think it's on any streaming services, probably Disney Plus, but we don't have that. I don't have that, but definitely I was a little lost for the first part of the film. And then, as the film went on, one of the things that confused me was as the young avatars got older, it was trying to tell who was who, especially between Neteyam and Loak. I don't know if were you confused a bit between them?
The issue that I had was the storyline did not really develop those characters as much. So because of that, there was no real context around them other than they were the son of the
Sully,
of Jake Sully and
Neytiri.
Other than that, there was really no content or context behind them. So that's what caused me to be a little bit confused as to who was talking, who was saying what, and their names were a little bit hard to catch as well because they said the names in passing, just as if you are in your home or if you are doing your thing, you're not going to dwell on your child's name. So that was natural, but because the names didn't stand out, because there was no real emphasis on the names, it was a little bit hard to tell them apart in the first. But I think it's really because there was no context around them other than they were children of the 2 main characters. There was really nothing else. So yeah, it was difficult because as you can see, the avatars all have a particular look. They're blue, they have like lines or patterns on them, but it was too hard to distinguish between the two boys because it's too hard when the screen flashes on them to really tell, oh, this pattern is different, so this is the younger son, or this pattern belongs to the older one. And then the hair was the same as well. They both had locks or dreads, so the hair did not help in trying to distinguish them. The only thing that kind of helped was, I think one was a little bit taller. So if they were standing side by side, I could tell which was the older one. And then they had like a different gear, like clothes on. Like one had a neck piece that was a little bit larger than the other one. So those were the things. But if the screen is flashing fast, you really can't tell. So it was a bit confusing in the first part, like the first, I don't know, half of the movie. I wasn't able to tell distinctively who was who unless they were in the same frame. And I could see that one was taller than the other one.
Yeah. And speaking about the length of the movie, how was it 3 hours and 12 minutes? How did you feel watching it?
I didn't think it needed to be that long because I think one of the main themes in the movie was revenge. And for a movie with one of the main, motivators being revenge, I don't think it needed to be 3 hours at all.
Yeah. To me, it wasn't long because for me, what it was the experience. Because, like for me, I wouldn't want to watch that movie at home. I still think that movie, like probably Jurassic World, Jurassic Park, belongs on the big screen. But outside of that, 3 hours wasn't extremely long for me on that, and I wasn't bored. Now that the movie has crossed $1 billion, Disney could make back its money from it. There are rumors out there that it needs $2 billion, but now it has reached there. Now, I think that it was easy for us to tell the difference between the sea avatars and the forest avatars, right? That part was easier because I noticed that they had like the sea ones were a bit greener and they had like fins and all of that stuff. Is it a movie that you said after going there you regret your purchase, or if you know what you know now, would you go again?
I would go again because the cinematography was really, really good. It was the artistry and the creativity behind it, I think, was excellent. And I thought that from the first movie. The cinematography was well worth it. So yeah, I would definitely go again. The only issue that I had was the storyline. I think the storyline could have been stronger. I think the plot could have been a little bit more intense. Like, the characters were really driven, or the antagonist was really driven by revenge. I don't think that is a strong enough motivation really for a 3-hour movie. I think there has to be some other things that are included, and there were odd bits and pieces with other things, making money from the secretion of the whales and like all these different things, but they were just like small little pieces that were put in. But back to your question, yes, you could tell the sea avatar is different from the forest ones because the color was different. The sea ones were aquamarine, the forest ones were blue. And they did have fins, their tails were different, that kind of stuff. So yeah, when it came to those two different, I guess, tribes or groups or communities, yeah, they did have distinguishing features that you could tell which was which.
And I had no clue that Kate Winslet was in there. Like that part, because she was Ronald. That's the wife of the chief. Right?
Well, it's really just voice acting, right? So if you don't recognize her voice, or she's
did you know that she's
easily recognizable? No.
Yeah, that's
I only knew the main characters, really.
Yeah. What I want to get into also was, I love Lord of the Rings. I consider this movie potentially could have been an epic, like Lord of the Rings. I know the Game of Thrones is not a movie, but it's a show, but I think it is an epic. Do you think that this rises to the level of an epic?
No, I think the movie is visually stunning for sure. But I think the plot or the storyline needs to be developed a little bit more. One of the things that Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and those epic stories have in common is that they have multiple plots. They have a major big plot. For example, with Lord of the Rings, it was about the Ring of Power, but then you had all these little storylines along the way that added up and that had a place in the overall bigger picture. Same with Game of Thrones. It was about the Iron Throne and ruling on the Iron Throne, but you had all these little stories and all these little storylines that kind of added up to the bigger picture. This movie does not have that. They mention little things along the way, but the big thing was revenge. So that's not strong enough to create an epic storyline, and it's not strong enough to create, epic sequels. It just isn't. You need something else. Again, the movie is visually stunning. It's very cinema, graphic, but the storyline or the plot needs to be more complicated than what it is.
Yeah, because from the first one to this one, it's basically just what I get from it is native people, enjoying their land, and people coming to invade and disturb them. And this whole thing about, I can't remember what they call that whale thing, but the whole thing about extracting something from that whale for youth and that, it was a created plot item, and the story just never seemed to gel with the first one. And I think probably it's because it was done so far after. I got a comment here. Let me see. Oh, thanks, Nolan. Thanks. Yes. So definitely, it was something that I basically wanted to watch with the family. And once I went there and I saw it, we had a big discussion after. I think it was a nice movie, but I wanted more to see a good plot. And I just didn't get that from it. I understand that they probably could have potentially be filming more. They could be filming more of these items, right? I think that they're going to film the third and the fourth. And so I look forward to seeing what that looks like. I'm not saying to rush out to the theater, but would you go back and watch the third?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely would. And the reason is because, like I said, the cinematography is out of this world. There is nothing that I believe comes close to it. It reminds me of Matrix, when the Matrix first came out, and they had all these slow and then fast and slow and then fast I don't know what the technical term for it is, but that was really interesting, attention grabbing, and it really set the trend for movies and even music videos after that, right? So I think for Avatar, it's kind of similar. Yeah, the scene effects. And I think Avatar is kind of similar in that way. I think this seems to be quite expensive, though. This seems to be quite an expensive venture to pull off. But I think Avatar in that way is a trendsetter, because they managed to create a whole different visual world using this sort of technology. And I think it's something that will carry, into the future for other movies and things like that. But again, it seems to be expensive. But yes, I would definitely go and watch it again, watch part 3, part 4, whatever. But I don't think my expectations in terms of the storyline is going to be high. The enjoyment for me, or what I would go to see, would be the cinematography and the visual effects. It wouldn't really be for the storyline, because I think the plot lacks a little bit and needs to be developed way more and needs to be much more complicated to make it something to really talk about after. Like, for example, Matrix, the scenes were good, right? But the storyline was also, oh my gosh, we're living like, the storyline itself was something to talk about, right? Yeah. So it was different, it was interesting, and it was complicated, because if you remember the first Matrix, the first one, Lawrence Fishburne, he explained to Neo what the whole thing was about, and we're living, you know, in a matrix where we're in the real world, it's controlled by machines, we're batteries, we're all in this kind of like trance or something and whatever. So that was a really heavy, complicated plot, and people actually thought, oh my gosh, we're living in a matrix. And then they created memes and they spoke about it, and like all, even now there are memes about being in the matrix, and you know, all, there's a glitch in the matrix and like all these different things. So I think Avatar, to be something that is spoken about for years to come or even months, they need something like that. They need a heavy plot. They need a complicated plot. They need something that's different and something that's interesting. It can't just be about revenge. It really just can't. That's not going to carry the movie. What's carrying it right now is all the visual effects that it has, but the plot, they need some really good writers. Yeah. That's just my opinion.
And, you know, one of the last things I want to talk to you about was, you know, in the movie, and guys, this is a spoiler alert, really, because, and it's on the video that this is a spoiler alert. When Netayam died in the movie, that part was telling for me. I did not feel a big connection to the character. And not having that big connection to the character kind of let me understood that, as you said, the plot was not that great, because we did see the character go along, but I could not tell the difference between Netayam and what's his brother?
Loak. But that goes back to what I was saying before. The content around them it wasn't developed. Aside from the fact that they were the children of the main characters, like what else is there? And that's the reason why you didn't feel a connection when he died, because their stories were not developed properly. Again, going back to Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, you know, the characters, even if they were not primary characters, the stories were developed. Take Littlefinger, for example. I mean, he died, you know,
Game of Thrones.
In Game of Thrones, he died within the story, but at the same time, his story, his little piece that he had was developed. And so because it was developed, you know, there was, oh my gosh, you know, I can't believe this is happening or whatever. There was that kind of moment because you knew where he was coming from. You knew what he had done, and you knew why he was, you know, going to die. The same thing with very, very minor characters like the Mountain, or those, what's the other one called? The Dog or the Hound, or something like that.
His brother.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like, even though they're not main characters or they're not major, and this guy, the one who died, Stark, his murder,
that was big because
his murder catapulted everything. But he died almost at the very beginning of the entire thing. But his character was developed enough that when he died, you felt it, and you were like, "Oh my gosh, what's gonna happen now?" Right? He was in charge of the North, and he had his family, and then all these different things. That's the difference between those movies and this one. The characters were not fully and properly developed. And that's why when they go through these challenges, you don't really feel anything.
So I'm getting from this conversation, and I think this is what my takeaway is from it, is that when we compare to Game of Thrones, which has George R.R. Martin, or, you know, we're comparing it to Lord of the Rings, which has J.R. Tolkien. Those are like expert writers, right? And if you go back to The Matrix, the Wachowski brothers, they did a fantastic job, you know, coming up with this. Is it that Avatar, and I think what we're getting from Avatar is they spend a lot of money on the cinematography, the graphics, all of that, but they actually need to invest in a good writer or a good team of writers, because if they do that, then you get something that you use that 3 hours, I think, more efficiently to develop the story, all of that stuff. One part of the movie that before we leave, I wanted to chat about was the time when we, you know, the humans went there and you saw all their spaceships coming. And then you saw, like a few scenes later, a train traveling through the jungle, and the train was attacked. Like, I couldn't connect both of them. I was like, were they there for years, or did they just do that? Like, I couldn't understand time. I had no concept of time at that point. That was one of the scenes that I was totally confused. And that. So definitely, I think that I want to see this franchise do well. I'm actually invested in it. I think it's one of those good franchises that I want to see do well. But I think what we're saying here is they need to do an investment in writers.
So I'll address the first point that you raised, and then I'll address the latter. They have the potential to be amazing, to be awesome. The reason why we're even comparing them to movies like Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, and Matrix and all that is because the potential is there. But I agree with you, they need to invest in developing the plot and the storyline. It has to become more complex, and they have to develop the characters a bit more, not just the main characters. So that's the first thing. They do have the potential. It does have the potential to be epic and to be awesome, but it does need a little bit more work. And the second thing is, well, the second point you raised about the spaceships and then the train, they're building a railroad and they hijack the train, whatever. It ties into the first one, and it's just about the storyline. It's about the writing. It's about all that. You know, they do need to invest in that portion of it in order to really realize the true potential of what Avatar could be or can be.
Yeah. And in closing, I've watched a lot of movies and I've seen franchises that falter and then pick up back. The biggest one we all remember was Star Wars. Star Wars did quite well, in the first rendition that they had in the 70s into the early 80s, and then it faltered when it came back in the 90s. And one of the things is we saw it come back on quite well once they started to get proper writing in there and all of that stuff. Also with Batman, we saw that with Batman took a little bit of a of a little falter during the time, and now it's back strongly. And that, so definitely I'm definitely looking at it and I'm saying I want to see what they come up with next. But I think if they don't improve the writing, number 3 may be the last one I ever go to watch at the cinema. And that's because I like the cinematography, but we really need a good story. So I want to thank our guest Tude for coming.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the discussion.
Okay, so thanks guys. We will leave this one up for a bit. Thanks.